want to talk to you today about the argument from dreaming. It's one of the classic arguments in favor of skepticism. It's a variation, I think, on the argument from variability and the problem of the criterion. But it adds a new twist, and that new twist is interesting. For a long time, I thought this really was simply a version of those prior arguments, that it didn't really deserve much except as an illustration, a particular case study. And we'll start by understanding it that way. But actually, I think there is an intriguing turn that's given here, and it's one that makes, maybe it doesn't make it more serious, but at least it's disturbing in a way that you might think the argument from variability and the problem of the criterion all by themselves aren't. What is the argument from dreaming?
The dream argument is a popular question in epistemology, essentially asking how do we know if what we are currently experiencing is real life, or if, in fact, we are actually dreaming?
Well, let's recall the general form of an argument from variability, and start at least thinking of things that way. It has a variability premise that says different beings perceive the world differently. There are disagreements in our perceptions about the world. It might be different people, animals of different species. It could be me in one mood or in another mood, in one circumstance, in another circumstance, at one distance from an object and another distance. It might be me at different times, different places, so on. So, in the argument from dreaming, we're going to be interested in a different sort of variation here. Not really me happy and me sad, but instead me awake and me sleeping. So, let's see. Okay, so here I am awake, here I am dreaming. And now the question is, well, I perceive the world in a different way. I'm going to see certain things be the case when I'm awake, certain things differently when I'm sleeping. Now, some of this, of course, is simply that I'm going to perceive all sorts of things as happening in my dreams that I don't perceive as happening in real life. Maybe people who have died are alive in my dream. Maybe I'm in a very different place, or things shift rapidly in the dream, so I'm in one place and suddenly I walk out the door, I'm in a very different place. Maybe I have this strong sense of familiarity that, here's a house that I'm very familiar with. I wake up and think that I've never seen a house like that. I have no idea what I was doing there or why I thought that was familiar. So there are all sorts of disagreements, you might say, between my perceptions of the world when I'm awake and when I'm asleep. Now, undecidability. There's no neutral way to decide among them. If it's different people who disagree, well, no neutral way to tell who's right and who's wrong. In the case of different beings perceiving the world differently, there's no neutral perceiver who doesn't have any particular, let's say, perceptual system who can decide who's perceiving it correctly and who's not. And so the conclusion is there's no reasonable belief about the world. Well, in the case of dreaming, we've got me awake and me sleeping, and the problem is there's no neutral way to decide which perception of the world is correct, or even whether I am asleep right now, and that's one of the unique twists. So let's take a look at some of the classic statements of the argument from dreaming. As usual, Zhuangzi gives us some of the first and some of the most beautiful examples. He says, "Those who dream of the banquet wake to lamentation and sorrow. Those who dream of lamentation and sorrow wake to join the hunt. While they dream, they don't know that they dream. Some will even interpret the very dream they're dreaming. And only when they wake do they know it was a dream." There are a couple of very important points being made here, I think. Yes, we perceive the world very differently in our dreams from the way we perceive it when we're awake. Some people who are happy when they're awake dream of lamentation and sorrow. Some who are sorrowful when they're awake dream of happiness, dream of the banquet. And so there are important variations.
If these sensory experiences, both awake and asleep, are the same, how do I know that I am not dreaming? And how do I know if I am awake?
Here is what's unique. While they dream, they don't know that they dream. In other words, Zhuangzi is saying, look, you might think this undecidability premise is just false in the case of dreaming. Because after all, here I am awake, here I am sleeping. I do ordinarily think there's a criterion for deciding which way the world is. Namely, I think it's the way I perceive it when I'm awake. Now, it's not that I'm always correct when I'm awake, but I'm very frequently not correct when I'm asleep. And so you might say, okay, here's the problem. In the case of dreaming, we can say there is a neutral way, okay? I trust my waking perception over my dreaming perception. I don't wake up having dreamed something and think, oh, maybe that was really true. Instead, I say, oh, it was just a dream, right? I'm being chased by the monster. I wake up and I think, oh, okay, there was no monster. I don't think, how do I know whether there was a monster? Oh my gosh, maybe it's still after me. No, I don't. I say, yeah, I'm now awake. That was only a dream. And so I discount it. So ordinarily we think, well, we do have a criterion. Prefer waking to sleeping beliefs. Prefer waking to sleeping perceptions. But now the problem of the criterion slips in. It's not so much how do we justify that, though, as we'll see, there is that question, how do we justify our perception? Maybe it's our dream life that is really revealing reality, and wakefulness is not the real world. But let's put that aside for a moment. Zhuangzi is raising a different problem. How do I know I'm awake right now? How do I know I'm awake talking to this camera instead of asleep and dreaming that I'm doing this? Maybe after all I'm thinking, yeah, tomorrow I'm going to talk about the argument from dreaming. And so I'm still asleep in my bed, dreaming that I'm giving this talk about the argument from dreaming. It could be. And so how do I know that I'm awake? Now, in cartoons, people pinch themselves. But that doesn't seem effective. Surely I can dream that I pinch myself. So that seems like an ineffective way of telling whether I'm dreaming. You might appeal to other things. It looks like radical discontinuities in space-time happen when I'm asleep. They don't happen when I'm awake. So there are all sorts of things like that. But the problem is, it doesn't feel like that when I'm asleep, right? When I'm in the midst of a dream, I don't think, wow, that's strange. My brother just turned into my friend. I don't think that really happens. I must be dreaming. I don't think that way within the dream. And so the problem is, yeah, okay, when I'm awake, I look and I perceive differences between my waking states and my dream states. But when I'm asleep, I don't perceive them. So how do I know that I'm actually awake right now? When I'm asleep, I don't perceive that I'm asleep. I can't tell the difference. Before we get to Zhuangzi's most powerful twist on the argument from dreaming, I want to see how it's presented in Sextus and also in Descartes, who gives us one of the most poetic and nice presentations of the argument from dreaming right at the beginning of the Meditations. So let's look first at Sextus. He says, sleeping and waking too give rise to different impressions. We don't imagine when awake what we imagine in sleep, nor when asleep what we imagine when we are awake. So in short, there is variation. There is disagreement and conflict between our perceptions. The existence or non-existence of our impressions is not absolute, but relative, being in relation to our sleeping or waking condition. Probably then in dreams we see things which to our waking state are unreal, though not wholly unreal, for they exist in our dreams, just as waking realities exist, though non-existent in dreams. So, in short, there really is variation. Now, why is this a problem? Well, Descartes elaborates this and goes back to the point that Zhuangzi makes, I can't tell from within the dream that I'm dreaming. I'm in the habit of sleeping, says Descartes, and in my dreams, representing to myself the same things or sometimes even less probable things than do those who are insane in their waking moments. How often has it happened to me that in the night I dreamt I found myself in this particular place, that I was dressed and seated near the fire, while in reality I was lying undressed in bed. At this moment, it does indeed seem to me that it's with eyes awake that I'm looking at the paper, that this head that I move is not asleep, that it's deliberately and of set purpose that I extend my hand and perceive it. What happens in sleep doesn't appear so clear or distinct as does all of this. But in thinking this over, I remind myself, on many occasions, I have in sleep been deceived by similar illusions. In dwelling carefully on this reflection, I see so manifestly that there are no certain indications by which we may clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep that I'm lost in astonishment. And my astonishment is such that it is almost capable of persuading me that I am now dreaming.
Look, it's impossible for you to know if you're dreaming or not, because anything that happens in real life could also happen in a dream.
So Descartes is making the point that it sounds fine to say there is a neutral way to decide among us, trust your waking states of mind, but hold on a second. I have to be identifying those waking states of mind from within whatever state I'm in. In other words, it's as if we say here, well, okay, yeah, different people disagree, but the most trustworthy is so-and-so. Trust that person. The problem is if I don't know who that person is, that doesn't help me, right? It might be that I say, do not worry about disagreements, my friend. Trust the true sage. And I say, but who's a true sage? You say, that is for you to find out. That doesn't help me at all, right? Yeah, I should trust the one who's got it right, but I don't know who that is. And similarly here, yeah, okay, you tell me to trust my waking perceptions of the world over my sleep perceptions of the world, my dreams. But the problem is, I don't know from within the dream state whether I'm dreaming or awake. I don't really know when I am awake or asleep, even within my waking state, because I think I can tell, but actually from within the dream, it appears to me that I'm in that waking state. So in other words, I say right now, well, I'm awake now, I can trust my perceptions now, but hold on a second, if I were dreaming, I would also be saying, but I'm awake now and I can trust my perceptions now. And so it looks as if I can't identify the neutral arbiter, I can't identify the criterion from within the states. So it doesn't help me. So there's a nice twist here. It's not just that there's no neutral way to decide among these different perceptions. Let's agree that there is. The problem is that I can't identify that neutral way from within those states of mind. So now we see what it would take to actually justify a reasonable belief. Not just to have a neutral arbiter, but to be able to identify the neutral arbiter. I have to have somebody who is neutral and can be identified by the various parties as neutral. So, one problem is, hey look, we disagree. Be wonderful to have this neutral person, the judge. I'll put the person in a judge's robe. Ha! Well, we'll pretend we're British and even give this person a wig. Here is our arbiter, our neutral judge. Well, first problem is there has to be such a person. But the second problem, brought out in a way by the problem of the criterion, is that we have to be able to identify the arbiter. We have to be able to say, here's the criterion, and use that criterion from within those various states of mind, when we're awake and when we're asleep. But that's precisely what we can't do. We can't use those criteria because it looks just the same to us from both of those. When I'm awake, I think I'm awake. When I'm asleep, I think I'm awake. And so it doesn't help me because I can't use the arbiter from within this sort of state of mind. Well, that's one way of looking at what is added uniquely by the argument from dreaming. It is, I think, properly viewed as an elaboration of the argument from variability. But it isn't just one more case study. Instead, I think it is adding something interesting. It's stressing not just that there has to be a neutral observer, a neutral criterion, but that we have to have access to it from any of those alternative states of mind. And that's a very difficult thing to achieve. There's one other twist, and it's something that Descartes and Sextus seem to ignore, but that Zhuangzi points out and makes dramatic. This is the most famous passage from Zhuangzi.
Once upon a time, I, Zhuangzi, dreamt I was a butterfly, fluttering hither and thither, to all intents and purposes a butterfly. I was conscious only of following my fantasy as a butterfly, and was unconscious of my individuality as a man. Suddenly, I awaked, and there I lay myself again. Now, I do not know whether I was then a man dreaming I was a butterfly, or whether I am now a butterfly dreaming I am a man.
I think there is a real power to what Zhuangzi is worried about here. And it's a power that goes beyond what we've said so far. It isn't just that I have to have some neutral arbiter, some neutral way of deciding among them, and that I have to have access to that arbiter from within both of these states. Suppose both of those things were satisfied. Suppose I do have a criterion, and I can say, Okay, good. I have a way of distinguishing my waking states from my dreaming states. I have the neutral criterion to tell when I'm awake and when I'm asleep. Suppose pinching myself actually worked, right? And so I can pinch myself from within a waking state. I could pinch myself from within a dream state. And suppose in both cases, which is not true, but suppose it were the case that even from within the dream would reassure me, oh, I'm just dreaming. All that would do is allow us to distinguish wakefulness from sleep. But would it tell us which is which? In other words, it would say, okay, there are two modes in which I interact with the world. There's this mode and that mode. Trust the waking mode. Okay, which is the waking mode? Am I really a college professor, dreaming, let's say, that I have some other life in a distant part of the world? Or am I someone with that other life in a distant part of the world, dreaming I'm a college professor? You can get a similar problem going if you think about madness. In fact, there's a marvelous episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, involving Commander Riker, who ends up being captured by aliens and is put in a prison. He is told by a group of aliens that he is insane, that he has only been dreaming his life, hallucinating his life as a starship commander, and is in fact now simply a mental patient. Occasionally he is lucid enough to think, no, I'm really a starship commander, and I'm being held in this mental hospital. But at other times, they manage to convince him that no, now we've finally drugged you and treated you to the point where you're lucid. You understand you're a patient in a mental hospital. You're not really a starship commander. And now he's thinking, in fact, I have these two lives. I have this life as a starship commander. I have this life as a mental patient. Which is real and which is, as it were, the dream, the hallucination? Am I really this starship commander who's been captured and given these hallucinatory drugs that is making me think that I'm crazy? Or am I this person who is in a mental hospital and really had just hallucinated that entire life as a starship commander? It's a very scary episode, and you see him struggle with this throughout the episode. I think Zhuangzi is saying, look, dreaming and waking are kind of like that. Suppose we did have a criterion. Suppose we actually were able to say, trust your waking life. That would be like telling Commander Riker, trust your real life. But he says, okay, look, the criterion isn't the problem. I can tell when I'm in the surroundings of a mental hospital and when I'm in the surroundings of a starship. No problem about identifying which is which. I can draw that line, okay? Moreover, you tell me, trust the real one. But which is the real one, right? You tell me to trust my waking experience over my dream experience or my hallucinatory experience. But I say the problem is I don't know which one is real. Which one is waking? Which one is sleeping? And Zhuangzi's worried about that. Was I a man dreaming I was a butterfly? Or am I now a butterfly dreaming I'm a man? How do I tell that? So even if I have the neutral way, even if I somehow had access to it, I still wouldn't know which side of that line I'm on.